Hey everybody, welcome back to the third part of this tutorial. First thing I want to go over right now is that I did forget to mention a couple of things. The first thing is that whenever you're rigging your vehicle, you want to make sure that the suspension and the wheels, they're stretched out to the maximum limit. So you don't want to have your wheels and your suspension all the way up to like this level. You want to make sure they're stretched out to as far down as they possibly can go, because when the physics are applied, it's basically going to add some weight and they're going to shift up, and we can actually control how much it's going to shift up, so we'll get there in time. But yeah, you want to make sure that the wheels are stretched all the way down. And the other thing I wanted to show you is the UVs of the tank tracks. So I've already done this. So basically, the UVs of the tank tracks are going on an up and down axis, and I've already had them unwrapped just because it means I don't have to show you how to unwrap, because I mean that's really not part of the tutorial. It's just you lay them out in a very specific way, and the tank tracks are going to be moving up and down because that's how the texture is. So that's that. I don't think I missed anything else. Again, if you do have questions, I mean, you can always post in the comments of the video, and I will do my best to answer them all. So now let's go into Unreal. Unreal. Woohoo! We made it this far. So that means you're still watching. Means I still have to keep going. Great. So, I've already gone ahead and made this before, but I'm going to show you how to do everything from scratch. So this is what I did before. We're going to be setting up all of these components. So this is our imported geometry, our animation tree, which is going to talk to everything. We have our collision, we have our tank track materials, our base material, and we have sorry, this is our collision, not this. This is our simplified collision mesh. These two are physical materials that are used for driving mechanics. We'll go over it in a bit. So let's go ahead and make this from scratch. So I'm just going to go ahead and select import and find the vehicle tutorial. I'll show you how to import both, so let's start with the FBX first. So I'm going to make a new package called new. Put it into the mesh group, so it'll create a structure. So when you're importing your skeleton mesh, you want to make sure that it's set to skeleton mesh and not static mesh. Besides that, everything is pretty straightforward. We do want to preserve our smoothing groups. That's about it. We don't want to import our materials because I'm going to set them up from scratch. Create groups automatically, yes. Okay, that's it. You might get a warning about like an older version of FBX formats. That's fine, it's still going to do it. Did I import it as a... Yeah, I accidentally imported it as a static mesh. Let me delete the other one. So yeah, you get your skeleton mesh. It looks just like that. I'm gonna go ahead and import it as the PSK format as well, just to show you like it's really no different. And that's it. We have everything there. I'm gonna go ahead and save this package because it's a new package and it doesn't exist anywhere. So super tank new, that's fine. So it's created our new package called new. I believe it's called new. Yes, it's called new. I'm gonna go ahead and fully load it, and let's get started. So first thing we want to do is probably make our tank look pretty. So we're gonna start with just the materials. So I don't have any textures for this guy, so I'm just going to create a new simple material. It's going to be called gray because I don't have any textures for this. Plug that in. Looks fine, right? I think so. Maybe a little brighter. Let's save it. So now it doesn't look like a checker pattern, but the tank tracks do. And for the tank tracks, it's probably really easy to just go ahead and copy over the tracks from the medium tank or any other tank. So I'm just going to copy the material instance, which is called MIVH. Let me scale this up. MIVH med underscore tracks. So I'm going to copy that, create a copy, find the tutorial package that we just saved in your materials, and I'm going to call it VH tracks. Okay. Go back to 128. My OCD is kicking in because I didn't name these groups the same. So now both our materials exist in the materials subfolder. I'm going to go ahead and save real quick. We don't need to make two copies of our tank tracks. We just need the one material, but because they're already on two different material IDs, so these guys, because they're already on two different IDs, they're going to be handled independently. So take the same material and apply it. There you go, that's basically our tank. It looks really pretty now. Sort of. Okay, first thing we want to do is set up our per poly collision. So we want to make sure that all of our weapons, all of the projectiles and lasers and whatever else, they collide based on the polygons. So I'm going to enable collision, and you're not going to see anything because we don't have anything, but I'm going to show it because as soon as I add a component, then you're going to see like a wireframe around it. So we're going to scroll down under the properties, find per poly collision bones. So we're going to click the green button, the plus sign, which is going to add a component or add an index, and we're going to type in the name of our bones, so be root, and you'll see like a wireframe appear as soon as that happens. So root. So how do I get rid of this? I don't want to see that. I'm just going to reopen it. It's bothering me. Anyway. Yeah. Show collisions. You can see that there is a wireframe now, and that's telling us that this piece of geometry or anything that's rigged to the root bone that we added is going to use per poly collision. So all our weapons are going to affect it. Now we want to do the same thing to our turret. So b underscore turret, y'all. And a good practice is it'll automatically auto-correct the name for capitals. So our bone name is called B underscore capital T turret, but I typed it in as a lowercase. So you automatically know if it switches the capitals, that it's located the correct bone and it's going to hook it up. If it doesn't change the caps, so you know what I'll do? I'll change this to I'll erase the A so it doesn't find anything, and you'll see that when I hit enter it doesn't change the capitals because it knows that the spelling is off and there's no bone that exists with this name. So as soon as I add the A back and I hit enter, you can see that the turret, the T on the turret and the Y on the yaw, they automatically correct it. So that way it's just another sort of mental check for you to know that, hey, I applied the right bone, because it auto-corrected. So let's add some more, and you can see like the wireframe showed up. So let's do the same thing for the turret pitch, which actually, no, we don't need to do that because there's no geometry that's skin weighted to the pitch bone, so nothing's going to happen. So let's do it to the fire bone, which is going to show up our barrel. There we go. Our barrel now has a wireframe on it. Let's do it to the wheels as well. So B, wheel, front right. Done. Now this is only good for components that are fully skin weighted, so the tank track is not fully skin weighted to one bone, so it's not really going to work out too well. So if I change this to suspension, then you're going to see only the front part, which was skin weighted completely to that suspension bone, is going to have the wireframe, but this part is not. So nope, see, I didn't spell it right. I missed something. Yeah, there's an L at the end. So again, a good mental check for you to know if something's working or not. So you can see there is collision over here, but there's nothing over to the back. Now, even if I add one to the back, so rear right, which is the back component, it's only going to apply collision to that part of the mesh, but it's not going to apply collision to the top. Now, this is more of a case of, well, it's not really necessary, because that little bit is, most of the times the wheel will pick it up, so you don't really need to worry about the tank tracks. So in this case, I'm just going to say, no, it doesn't really matter, I don't need it, so I'm going to get rid of those. So let's do the other four wheels, so rear right, and then I'm just going to copy them twice, and then front left, and rear left. There you go. So now all of our components have per poly collision, except for the tank tracks. Okay. So if we didn't add these, then it's going to use a simplified collision mesh, which we're going to set up later. So right now I just want to go ahead and set up everything in the skeletal mesh. So next up, we're going to set up all of our sockets. Now, sockets are kind of like bones, but they are independent to anything you do inside of Max. So you can add as many sockets as you want, and really sockets are used in code to kind of find things really quickly. Rather than looking for a bone, it looks for a socket. So we need to make a few sockets, and usually they're very useful for particles. So let's start by setting up some of the default ones that we always need. So on the root, we need a socket called VH death, not capital, this way. This is going to spawn our explosion particle effect as soon as the vehicle blows up. So you can position this anywhere you want. So next up, we need to add our muzzle flash, where it's going to spawn the particle, but also where it's going to spawn the cannon. So find B turret fire and hit OK. Let's call this muzzle flash socket. You can name it anything you want, it's really up to you. Muzzle flash socket. Yeah. Okay. That's what we're going to call it. The other main vehicle sockets that you absolutely need are Cam View 3P. This is a very specific name. This is the third person vehicle camera. So you can move this, and I'm going to keep it at 0. I'm just going to move it up. Then in code we can offset the camera from being over here to be slightly pushed out, but it's going to orbit around this socket. So I'm going to place the socket somewhere around above the turret. That's good enough. Let's add the first person version of it. So I'm going to add turret yaw, because I want to put the camera somewhere like kind of like a gun camera, right? So it should be parented to the main turret control, which is the turret yaw bone. So again, the name of it is cam view 1p. So this is a first person. Let's put it somewhere about here, so you kind of get like a nice gun camera. We can adjust this later, it's no big deal. You don't have to set them up exactly as it should be in here right now. And I think that's about all of the main important ones that we need. So we have some custom ones for handling certain components. So the first one is our particle emitters for the wheels. Now what happens in default UDK for vehicles is that it will spawn a particle for every wheel. Now we just took a look at the medium tank and it has 14 wheels. So that means it's spewing a ton of particles that we don't need, because it's going to slow down the game. It's not an efficient way of generating wheel-based particles. So I'm going to open up the medium tank. So you can see it has 7 wheels on each side, and it has to calculate it for each and every single wheel. So we built a custom system which only requires sockets on the very bottom of the very ends of the tank tracks. So it's only going to spawn a particle at the front, one at the back, and for the other side as well. So you can set up as many of these as you want, but generally we try to keep it optimized. So we only have 4 at the 4 corners. So let's do the same thing, and they have to be set up in this very specific naming convention. So it's this wheel effect socket 1, 2, 3, blah blah blah, however many you want. So let's set those up. Oh, and while I have this open, you can see there's so many sockets on the medium tank, and a lot of these are because they are particle emitters that are being generated whenever the vehicle takes a certain amount of damage. So for example, we have smoke coming out of the engine, we have sparks spewing out from the tank tracks. There's just a whole bunch of them. There's also sockets for the antennas that I was talking about earlier. So all of these are completely unnecessary, but you can set them up as well if you want to. I recommend you do if you're making a custom vehicle. It's always nice to make it pretty. So actually, you know what, we'll go ahead and set one of these effects, so like the damage effects. We'll maybe make our vehicle catch fire after a certain damage. So I'm going to start by setting up the wheel effect bones. We're going to apply them on the suspension. We don't want them on the wheels themselves. So suspension front right. The reason why is because if we apply them on a wheel, the wheel spins in any offset we give it. So hit cancel. If the wheel is spinning and we spawn this socket on the wheel bone, it's going to spawn over here in the very center. But we want it to be at the bottom because that's where the projectile or particles are going to spawn. So if we offset it from the wheel's center location, the center pivot, then as soon as the wheel is spinning, the particle effect, the socket is also going to be spinning around the radius of the wheel, which is something we don't want. So we're going to attach it to the suspension because the suspension doesn't spin, it only goes up and down. So front right suspension, hit OK, wheel effect socket. I'm going to copy this name so it's easier to just add one later. So hit OK, and now move it all the way down. So do the same thing on the other 3 suspension bones. I'm just going to copy, actually no, I don't want to copy because it's going to copy over the name. So just eyeball it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to look right eventually, so long as it's on the bottom. And the last one. Okay. There we go. Move it down. Sweet. Let's go ahead and add a particle effect, which is going to spawn fire as soon as a vehicle reaches a certain percentage of health. So on the root bone, I'm going to add a damage fire 01. It doesn't really matter what the name is. We can plug that in later. So I'm just going to position it at the back. And that's about it. In terms of sockets, I don't think we need anything else. I think that's good. So that is about it for all of the sockets that we need on our skeletal mesh. So let's go ahead and set up some of the other components. So first thing, let's go back to our package. We're going to set up our Simplified Collision mesh, which is our physical asset. So to generate that, we're going to generate it based off of the skeleton mesh, and it's going to generate a simplified mesh, or usually a box, on everything that has full skin weighting on it. So we know that the barrel has full skin weighting. We know that the top of the turret has full skin weighting in all the wheels, as well as the root bone. So it's going to create a box around all of those. So right click on the skeletal mesh, and we're going to go down and find create new physics asset. So click on that. I'm going to place it in the same location, hit OK, and you get this dialog box. You can orient bones to, or the meshes to the bones. You have options of what kind of geometry you want to spawn. We're going to stick with box. Use verts, so dominant weights or any weights. We're going to stick to dominant weights because it's going to make it easier for us. Any weights means that it'll create geometry that we don't really need. In the end, we're going to delete a lot of components because we only really just need a box. So yeah, we can create joints and anything else. Like I usually just leave that to default and then fix it up as I go. So hit OK, and you see this new window pop up, as well as the physics asset that just got generated. So in here, this is our simplified collision. So if we did set up the per poly collisions in the skeletal mesh, then all of the collision would be handled in this way. So the bullets and the cannons and rockets, lasers, all that stuff, they would be colliding with these geometry pieces. So these extra bits, anything that isn't the root bone, so all of these, they also collide with characters. So you can technically run people over with any of these bones. And we had a problem with that back in the Unreal Tournament 3 version of the mod because we had collision on the barrels. And anytime you turned the turret, you could technically run people over with that, and it was really easy to get kills. It was really difficult to go up to a vehicle and plant a C4 on it because all they had to do is turn the turret and you would get run over. So we're going to have to go ahead and trim down a lot of these pieces because we just don't need them. So I'm going to go ahead and delete almost everything. Actually, I am going to delete everything except for the base. So I'm just going over them and pressing delete, hitting OK. We really don't need any of them. This is also the world collision box. So if you have like a tree come up, it's not going to collide with the per poly collision, it's going to collide with that. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the scale mode, and I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger so it encompasses the entire vehicle. So scale it in each direction to kind of just fill up the areas. Scale it up a little bit, and then I'm going to move it upwards. So I switch back to the move tool and go all the way to the top. So that looks about right. It doesn't have to be perfect. In the end, like sometimes what I would do is I would have less of a gap on the bottom and move it up so that it gives more room for the physics of the wheels to play around. So if you have some sort of low, a block that's pretty low on the ground, you may not want it to collide with a box that's kind of further down. We want it to collide with the wheels. So I tend to be a bit lenient on where the collision box is, and generally I try my best to keep it further up. It's still enough to run anybody over even if they're crouching, but it also gives us a little bit more room when we're driving around, so we don't get stuck on little obstacles. So that's that. That's all we need to do for the physics asset. It's pretty straightforward. It's very simple. Next thing I want to go ahead and set up are the physical materials. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the previous attempt of this tutorial, the first attempt, and it's these guys. Basically all I did for that is copy over the ones from the UT3 example vehicle assets. So that's essentially all we really need to do. We just need to get driving physics parameters, or not necessarily driving physics parameters, but physics parameters based on when the vehicle is being driven or when it's just standing idle. So I'm going to open up the medium tank. Now I'm just going to copy over these two physical materials, and then we'll go over what's inside them. So copied over to tutorial super tank, okay. So they've both been copied over, and essentially it's the same exact parameters, or almost the same exact parameters being used for every single vehicle. So when I open one of them up, I'm going to open up the base one, not the driving one. We need both. So we have parameters like how much friction it has, restitution is how much of a bounce it has if it hits something. Density is kind of like your weight, and that's really it. And we also want to make sure that we're based off of the physics parameters of metal, which is already defined in the UDK. So if I hit the search icon, it's going to point me to the metal physical material, which is, I think it's located in UT3 environments, physical materials, and we have metal. So that's what it's actually referencing. So in here, it's basically copying over the parameters of metal, and that's about it. So going back, so we can play around with these as we're testing out the vehicle, but generally for the most part at least, I just leave them untouched because they're almost completely irrelevant to how the vehicle handles, except for the density and the friction. Like these three parameters are really the only ones you need to worry about. So I'm going to close this. Actually, I'm going to set the density to 1 because that's the default. I just made the medium tank a little bit heavier so it doesn't get toppled over by like the mammoth tank, for example. Restitution, I'm going to reset all of these to the default because the default properties, they work really well. Let's open up the other one, the driving one, and again I'm just going to reset them all. and the only thing we need to enable for the the only thing we need to enable for the driving version is enable anisotropic friction. But technically we don't actually need to do this because we're overriding a lot of these parameters in the code. So you probably won't notice any changes, but if you want to disable that part of the code, you can do it, and then you can fine-tune them individually. When you enable anisotropic friction, and you can tell it to be less, or rather have no friction in a certain direction. So the forward-backwards direction, when you're driving, you may not want it to latch onto obstacles as easily. So we can set the X direction to 1. And this way, the friction won't be applied in the forwards and backwards direction when we're driving, at least. So that's pretty much it. I'm gonna leave that as that. I'm gonna go ahead and save, just because I haven't saved in a while. Alright, so I think that's about it in terms of the editor features, except for the animation tree, which is really the big one, and I want to have a separate chapter for that one, because there's so many things that we can set up in here, and it's kind of like rigging inside of the editor. So in Max you kind of just set up a basic bone rig, but inside the editor you sort of define much more parameters and properties of how the rig behaves. And really the animation tree, it is a it's the middleman that sort of talks to the art and talks to the code and gets them to play along together. If we don't have that, we're basically not going to get anywhere. So the animation tree is super important. We're going to cover it in the next chapter. So let's go ahead and get to the next chapter. What are you doing still watching this? Go to the next one. See you there.